You walk into a room, square your shoulders, force a smile, and tell yourself you've got this. And for a few minutes, it actually works. People believe you. Maybe you even believe you. But then something small happens, someone questions you, ignores you, laughs at the wrong moment, and it all falls apart in seconds. That confidence you built. It wasn't strength. It was a performance. And if it's not real, what does that make everything you've built on top of it? That question follows you into everything: the job interview, the conversation you keep putting off, the room you walk into and immediately shrink in. But maybe the problem isn't confidence at all. Maybe it's what you've been comparing yourself to the whole time. And there's one shift, so small you'd almost miss it, that changes everything once you see it. That shift is exactly what Book Echo English keeps circling back to, the pattern most people never see until someone points at it. Stick around. That pattern usually shows up in one place first, the moment things actually get tested. Not in the mirror, not in the pep talk you give yourself in the car, but the second someone in the room disagrees with you, or a question comes out of nowhere you weren't ready for. Think about someone giving a presentation. They walk in polished, voice steady, shoulders back. Everything about them says they've got this handled. Then someone in the back raises a hand and asks something they hadn't prepared for. And in that half a second, you can watch it happen, the pause that goes on a beat too long, the voice that climbs half an octave, the hands that suddenly don't know where to go. The confidence didn't disappear. It was never actually there. What was there was a costume, and the costume just got tested by a question it wasn't built to survive. Or maybe it's not a stage at all. Maybe it's a text you left on read for 2 days because you didn't know how to sound sure of yourself in the reply. Same collapse, smaller stage, same tell. That's the part most people get backwards. They think confidence is what you show before something hard happens. But confidence was never about the calm before. It's about what's left standing after. Anyone can look composed when nothing's asking anything of them. The real test only shows up under pressure, and pressure has a way of finding every seam in something that was never actually stitched together. Here's the uncomfortable part. If your confidence only exists when things are going well, it was never confidence to begin with. It was a mood. A weather pattern. Something that shows up on good days and quietly leaves the second a bad one starts. And most people never notice the difference, because most days don't actually test them. You can go months, sometimes years, without anyone asking you the one question that exposes the gap. Which means you can build an entire identity, a job title, a relationship, a whole sense of who you are, on top of something that's never once been stress tested. And that's the real cost nobody talks about. It's not that faking confidence makes you look bad in one bad moment. It's that everything you build while faking it, the decisions you make, the risks you take, the way you let people treat you, all of it gets built on a foundation that was never actually load-bearing. You don't find out it can't hold weight until something heavy finally lands on it. So the real question isn't how do you look more confident. It's why the composure caves in the first place. And if you trace it back far enough, it usually leads to the same place, not the moment itself, but who you were really trying to prove something to when you walked into that room in the first place. That question, who you're performing for, is usually easier to spot in other people than in yourself. You've probably watched someone change the second a certain person walked into the room. Their laugh gets louder, their opinions get softer, they suddenly agree with things they were arguing against 5 minutes earlier. You can see exactly whose approval they're chasing. What's harder to see is that you're doing the same thing, just for someone you've stopped noticing. Most people assume their confidence comes from inside them. But if you actually trace where it goes up and where it goes down, it usually tracks one thing, whether a specific person or group approves of what you just did. A parent. An old teacher. A friend group you left behind years ago but still somehow perform for. You built a version of yourself that's really good at reading a room, and somewhere along the way you mistook that skill for confidence. It's not confidence. It's calibration. You're constantly adjusting to stay approved of, and adjusting isn't the same as standing still in who you are. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. That audience doesn't even have to be in the room. You can be completely alone, making a decision nobody will ever see, and still run it through the filter of what that one person would think. Which means the confidence you thought was yours was actually rented. And rent comes due. The second that person's opinion shifts, or the second you imagine it might, the whole structure wobbles, because it was never built on what you actually believe. It was built on what keeps you approved. This is why some people seem completely at ease with total strangers but fall apart around one specific person from their past. It's not that their confidence is inconsistent. It's that it was never really theirs to begin with, it was always addressed to somebody. Change the audience, and the performance either holds or collapses depending on whether that particular judge is watching. The impact of this runs deeper than most people realize. If your sense of self is addressed to an audience, every decision quietly becomes a negotiation instead of a choice. Which job to take, who to date, what to say in a meeting, all of it gets run through the same invisible question: would they approve? And the exhausting part is that this audience rarely gives you a final answer. You just keep performing for people who may not even be thinking about you anymore. Real confidence doesn't ask that question first. It doesn't mean you stop caring what anyone thinks, that's not realistic and it's not even healthy. It means the approval becomes information, not permission. You can hear it, weigh it, and still choose your own answer. But most people never get there, because getting there means facing something a lot less comfortable than an audience. It means facing the parts of yourself you've been avoiding by staying so busy managing everyone else's opinion of you. Avoiding is the word that matters here, because avoiding doesn't feel like avoiding while you're doing it. It feels like being busy. It feels like being reasonable. You tell yourself you'll have that conversation later, you'll ask for the raise once things settle down, you'll put yourself out there once you feel more ready. And each time you choose the easier option, it feels small. Harmless. Just today, just this once. But confidence isn't something you either have or don't have sitting in a drawer somewhere. It works more like a muscle. Every time you face something uncomfortable and get through it, that muscle gets a little stronger, a little more trustworthy the next time. And every time you avoid it instead, the muscle doesn't stay the same size. It shrinks. Not dramatically, not in a way you'd notice in the moment, but steadily, the way anything shrinks when you stop using it. Think about someone who used to speak up easily in meetings years ago, back at an old job, and somewhere along the way started staying quiet instead. Maybe one comment landed badly once. Maybe someone talked over them a few too many times. So they adjusted, just stopped raising their hand as much. It felt like nothing at the time. But 2 years later, they're in a new meeting, they have something worth saying, and the words just won't come out. Not because they got less capable. Because the muscle that used to make speaking up feel normal simply hasn't been used in 2 years. This is the part that makes avoidance so dangerous, it never announces itself. Nobody wakes up one day and decides to stop being confident. It happens one small skipped moment at a time. The hard conversation you didn't have. The opportunity you talked yourself out of. The version of you that stayed quiet instead of taking the risk. None of those moments feel significant alone. But they compound, the same way skipping the gym for one day doesn't matter, and skipping it for 2 years absolutely does. And here's the part that connects everything back to that audience you were performing for. Avoidance and performing for approval feed each other. You avoid the uncomfortable thing because you're scared of what that audience will think if it goes badly. And the more you avoid it, the weaker you get at handling it, which makes you even more scared to try next time. It's not one bad habit. It's a loop that tightens every time you let it run. The way out isn't a mindset shift or a better pep talk. It's genuinely just repetition, doing the uncomfortable thing enough times that your nervous system stops treating it like a threat. Which sounds almost too simple to be the answer. But most simple things are the ones people skip looking for, because they're too busy searching for something that feels big enough to match how stuck they feel. Except there's a reason it feels so much bigger than it is. And it usually has less to do with the thing itself, and a lot more to do with what you're quietly comparing yourself against every time you consider doing it. Comparing yourself against something is normal, the problem is what most people compare themselves against without ever realizing it. It's rarely a fair fight. You're comparing your behind the scenes to someone else's highlight reel, comparing your messiest, most uncertain moments to the 2 seconds of someone else's life you happen to see. And you lose that comparison every single time, because it was never a real contest to begin with. Picture scrolling through your phone at night and landing on someone your age who seems to have it all figured out, the career, the relationship, the way they carry themselves in every photo. What you're seeing is a finished result. What you don't see is the version of them from 3 years ago who felt exactly like you feel right now. You're comparing your rough draft to someone else's final copy, and then wondering why you feel like you're falling behind in a race you never actually agreed to run. Here's what makes this worse than ordinary jealousy. It doesn't just make you feel bad for a minute and pass. It quietly resets what you think enough looks like. If you keep measuring yourself against people who seem to have more, be more, or handle things better, your own baseline for confidence keeps getting redrawn a little further out of reach. You could genuinely be doing better than you were last year, and still feel behind, because the goalpost you're using was borrowed from somebody else's life. The specific damage this does to confidence is easy to miss. It's not that comparison makes you feel bad about one thing. It teaches you to evaluate yourself through someone else's eyes instead of your own. And once that becomes a habit, it doesn't just show up when you're scrolling, it shows up in a job interview, in a relationship, in a room full of strangers, because you've trained yourself to ask, how do I measure up, before you ever ask, what do I actually think? This is where the earlier pieces start locking together. Remember that audience you never chose to perform for. Comparison is often how that audience gets picked in the first place. You see someone who seems to have it figured out, and without meaning to, you hand them a vote in how you see yourself. And remember the muscle that shrinks from avoidance. Comparison is one of the main reasons people avoid trying at all, because why start something you've already convinced yourself you'll lose? The way out of this isn't finding better people to compare yourself to, or telling yourself comparison is bad and trying to just stop. That rarely works, because the habit runs deeper than willpower. The real shift happens when you change what you're actually measuring, not how you stack up against someone else's life, but whether you're closer to where you were than you used to be. Which sounds obvious once you hear it. But almost nobody actually builds their life around that measurement, because it doesn't come with the same instant hit that measuring yourself against other people gives you. It's slower. Quieter. And it usually starts with something so small you'd almost overlook it as unimportant. That small, easy-to-overlook thing is usually just one decision, repeated. Not a declaration. Not a big moment where you announce to yourself that everything changes starting now. Just one small action, done consistently, long before it feels like it's working. Most people get this backwards because of how confidence gets portrayed everywhere, as a switch you flip, a speech you give yourself in the mirror, a moment of, today's the day. So they wait for that moment. They wait to feel ready, to feel sure, to feel like the version of themselves who could actually do the hard thing. And that moment rarely arrives on its own, because confidence doesn't usually come before the action. It comes after it, as a result of it, built one small rep at a time. Think about learning to drive. Nobody feels confident behind the wheel the first time. You're gripping it too tight, overcorrecting, hyper-aware of every car around you. But you don't wait to feel confident before you drive again the next day. You just drive again. And somewhere around the 20th or 30th time, without any dramatic turning point, your hands loosen and your shoulders drop and you realize you stopped thinking about it. The confidence showed up quietly, in the background, while you were busy just doing the thing. This is exactly why the loud, declarative version of confidence, the one that shows up in a single big moment, rarely holds up. It's built on adrenaline and willpower, and both of those run out. What replaces them has to be something steadier. Small actions don't ask for adrenaline. They just ask you to show up again, even on the day you don't feel like it, especially on the day you don't feel like it, because that's usually the rep that counts the most. Here's why this matters more than it seems to on the surface. Every time you do the small uncomfortable thing instead of waiting to feel ready, you're sending yourself a piece of evidence. Not a pep talk, not a belief you're trying to convince yourself of, actual proof, something that already happened, that you can rely on later. And evidence is much harder to talk yourself out of than a feeling ever was. Feelings change by the hour. What you've actually done stays true. This connects back to that muscle from earlier, the one that shrinks with avoidance. Small consistent action is simply the muscle working in the other direction, not one dramatic rebuild, but the same quiet repetition that shrank it now growing it back, rep by unremarkable rep. And there's a reason this approach works when the big declarations don't. It has less to do with the actions themselves, and more to do with what you're actually building a relationship with while you do them, something a lot of people confuse with confidence, but that isn't quite the same thing at all. That thing people confuse with confidence has a name, and it's self-respect. It sounds like a small distinction, almost technical, but it changes everything about how this actually works. Self-esteem is how you feel about yourself in the moment. It goes up when things go well and drops when they don't. Self-respect is different. It's not about how you feel. It's about whether you can trust yourself to do what you said you would. Here's where the two split apart. You can feel great about yourself after a compliment, a win, a good week. That's self-esteem doing its job, and there's nothing wrong with it. But self-esteem is reactive. It's built out of things that happen to you. Self-respect gets built the opposite way, out of things you do, especially the things nobody's watching. It's keeping the promise you made to yourself to go to the gym on the day you didn't feel like it. It's not gossiping about someone even though it would have been easy. It's small, private, and it accumulates whether anyone notices or not. Picture two people who both just failed at something, lost a job, ended a relationship, missed an opportunity they wanted badly. One of them spirals, because their sense of self was resting on the outcome going well. The other one is disappointed, genuinely, but doesn't fall apart, because their sense of self was never resting on the outcome in the first place. It was resting on how they showed up. And how they showed up, honestly, consistently, without cutting corners when it would have been easy to, didn't change just because the result did. This is the piece that explains something confusing from earlier. Remember the person who looked completely composed until one hard question exposed them. That's what happens when self-esteem gets mistaken for the whole picture. It looks like confidence because it can look impressive when things are going well. But it has nothing underneath it for the moment things go badly, because it was never built out of trust in yourself to begin with. Self-respect is what's still standing when the compliments and the good outcomes disappear. The impact of this is bigger than it sounds. If you're chasing self-esteem, you end up chasing situations that make you feel good, which quietly pushes you toward comfort, toward avoiding anything risky enough to fail at. But if you're building self-respect, the direction flips. You start seeking out the harder thing, the honest conversation, the uncomfortable rep, because that's exactly what it's built from. It's not more pleasant in the moment. It's just the only version that survives contact with a bad day. And this is where it gets almost impossible to fake. You can perform confidence for other people. You cannot fake self-respect for yourself. You already know, underneath everything, whether you've been keeping your word to you. Which means the real audit was never external at all, it was the one voice you've been listening to, or ignoring, this entire time. That voice you've been listening to, or ignoring, has actually been the one writing every chapter so far, the one deciding whether a hard moment gets read as proof you can't handle things, or just something you're currently in the middle of. Most people think their inner voice is just commentary, background noise running underneath the real events of their life. It's not background. It's closer to the narrator, and narrators shape the whole story just by choosing which parts to emphasize. Here's what that actually looks like. Two people can go through the exact same setback, get the same rejection, make the same mistake in front of the same room. One person's inner voice says something like, "That was rough," and moves on. The other person's inner voice says, "See, this is what always happens, this is who you are." Same event. Completely different aftermath. Not because one person is stronger than the other, but because one of them has spent years running a narration track that treats a bad moment as information, and the other has spent years running one that treats it as a verdict. Most people never notice this voice because it's been running so long it just sounds like the truth. It doesn't announce itself as a choice. It sounds like an accurate summary of who you are, when it's actually just a habit, one built the same way any habit gets built, through repetition, usually starting way earlier than the moment you'd think to blame. And because it sounds like truth instead of habit, almost nobody questions it. They just live inside whatever it's been telling them. This is why two people can do the exact same amount of work building the muscle, avoiding less, comparing less, keeping more promises to themselves, and still end up in different places. If the voice underneath all of it keeps narrating every effort as not enough, the effort has to fight its own narrator just to register. It's like doing the reps at the gym while someone stands next to you insisting you're not actually getting stronger. Eventually you either turn the volume down on that voice, or you start believing it over the evidence. The impact of this is why confidence built without addressing the voice tends to be so fragile. You can do everything right, keep the promises, take the small actions, stop performing for the wrong audience, and still feel like an imposter underneath it, because nobody went back and questioned the narrator running commentary on all of it. The actions change your life. The voice decides how that change gets interpreted. Which brings everything back to one place. Not the room that goes quiet, not the audience, not the comparison, not even the habit, all of it eventually runs through the same narrator, the one you've had the least practice questioning because you assumed it was just you talking. If you've made it this far, you're already ahead of most people. Not because you know more facts now, but because you're actually willing to look at how you talk to yourself, which most people avoid their whole life. So here's the practical piece, the thing you can actually use, starting today. The next time that narrator says something like, "This is just how you are," or, "You always mess this up," stop and ask it one specific question: is this a fact, or is this just familiar? That's it. That's the whole tool. Not a 5-step framework, not a journaling practice you have to keep up for months before it works. One question, asked in the moment the voice runs its usual line. Here's why that specific question works when other things don't. Most inner voice advice tells you to argue with the thought, replace it with something positive, drown it out. That takes energy you often don't have in the moment, and it can feel fake, which makes you trust it even less. Asking, "Is this fact or familiar?" doesn't ask you to believe anything new. It just asks you to check the voice's credentials. And most of the time, when you actually check, you'll find the voice isn't reporting evidence. It's just replaying the oldest, loudest thing it's ever said, because repetition is the only qualification it's ever had. Picture it happening in real time. You're about to send a message asking for something you want, a raise, a second date, a favor, and the voice kicks in with, "Don't bother, people like you don't get what they ask for." Instead of arguing with it or trying to force confidence you don't feel, you just ask the question. Is that a fact, or is it familiar? And usually, if you're honest, you'll realize you can't actually point to solid evidence. You can point to old moments that felt like evidence at the time, but weren't really about this specific ask, this specific day, this specific version of you. What this does over time is quietly separate the voice from the truth. It doesn't get louder or slower or gentler. It just starts sounding less like an authority and more like a habit that's allowed to be wrong, the same way any old habit is allowed to be wrong once you actually notice it happening. And here's how this ties back to everything else. The room that goes quiet, the audience you perform for, the avoidance, the comparison, the small actions, the self-respect you build in private, none of it fully sticks if the narrator underneath is still allowed to overwrite the evidence without being questioned. This one question doesn't replace any of that work. It's what makes the work actually count. It's the missing piece that lets everything else you've done finally get heard over the voice that's been talking the loudest the whole time. So here's what actually happened over the last half hour. It started with a room going quiet and a version of confidence that only holds up when nothing's testing it. Underneath that was an audience you never chose to perform for, quietly steering decisions you thought were entirely your own. Underneath that was avoidance, wearing itself as reasonableness, slowly shrinking a muscle you didn't notice going unused. Underneath that was comparison, handing your sense of enough to someone else's highlight reel. And underneath all of it, the whole time, was one narrator, deciding whether every hard moment gets read as evidence against you or just something you're currently in the middle of. None of this gets fixed by trying harder to look confident. It gets rebuilt the same way it eroded, small action by small action, promise kept by promise kept, until self-respect quietly becomes the thing holding you up instead of everyone else's opinion. So today, just once, catch the narrator in the act. When it says something familiar, ask it if it's actually true. That's the whole assignment. Nothing more than that. But catching the narrator only handles half of it. There's still the real audience, actual people whose opinions still hang over decisions you make every single day, whether you've noticed it or not. And there's a harder truth waiting on the other side of that. Sometimes respecting yourself means learning to stop needing their approval at all, even the people you've spent years trying to earn it from. That's exactly where the next video goes, why nobody actually respects you until you learn how to ignore them. If something in today's video landed, that one's going to hit even harder. It's right there on your screen now, so go ahead and click it. And if you want more of this kind of thing, sticking around here is the easiest way to catch it.